Hey there, welcome to day 9. In this one, we are going to be sending and receiving email using Gmail. Now, the reason we're using Gmail is because it's free, and also it's fairly easy to set up doing these things. Now, if you don't have a Gmail account, let's go ahead and do that now. Go to gmail.com or mail.google.com and log in. You should see something like this. Next, you're going to want to navigate over to your account settings, and you're going to want to go into security. And then down on the bottom of security, or not the bottom, not quite the bottom, but you're going to want to look for less secure app access. And you're going to want to turn this on. That's absolutely critical to making this work correctly. If you are using your personal account, realize that this allows your account to be a little bit vulnerable, which is why I recommend just creating a random account. In my case, I'm using hungrypie@gmail.com. It's not a real account, so if you email it, I'm not going to answer. The next thing is we want to allow CAPTCHA to this URL right here, display unlock CAPTCHA. Just go ahead and do that and make sure that your account access is enabled. Every once in a while, you might have to reopen this URL up to allow your Python program to actually log in to Gmail on your behalf. Now, I will say just in general, if you're going to be using this in a production application, you're going to want to use something more like SendGrid. SendGrid is a transactional email service that allows you to send thousands upon thousands, if not millions of emails at a time. Gmail will start to block that. Once you get to a certain threshold, Gmail will be like, nah, you can't do that anymore. So those are a couple things that we just need to get out of the way before we get started. So now let's go into VS Code, and we're going to copy our day 8 folder here. And of course, I'm going to rename it to day 9. All right, so let's go ahead and create a new module in day 9, and I'm going to call this sendMail.py, as in send email. And inside of here, I'll go ahead and define a new function called sendMail. Now, yes, the function that we're using and the module name is identical. So this one is going to take our text, as in our email body. It's going to take in a subject, so subject equaling to hello world, as in our email subject. And then we want to say who we're sending it to. So I'll just say 2 emails, and I'm going to set it equal to an empty list. Now, one of the things that we want to make sure is that this will always be a list. So to do this, we can say if isInstance will check if any given object or variable is a certain type. So I can say 2 emails is a list. All right, so typing out list is a built-in class to Python. So this is basically saying, hey, if this is a list, then we'll go ahead and say this is all good. Now, a way to sort of raise an error is just to say assert and then get rid of the colon and pass. And this will just basically run an error if this is not a list. So I can even, by default, have this in as none. You'll see this from time to make sure that any argument that you're passing is of a certain type. So in this case, I want it to be a list of emails because there's going to be multiple people that I might end up sending it to. Even if it's to one person, still going to be a list of one single person. So what we want to do is actually log in to the SMTP server. Now the SMTP server in our case is going to be Gmail. And before I go any further, I want to make sure that you are aware that this is just a word break here. I just turned on word breaks. You can go into preferences, into settings, and look for word break, or rather, sorry, not word break, but word wrap. And you could turn it on or off. If I turn it off, the code actually just goes off to the side. That's all that's happening there. I don't have some new weird syntax I didn't talk about. So anyways, let's go back in here, and we want to log in to Gmail and actually send a message. So what we need to do is say username equals to and password equals to. So our username is going to be the actual email that we log in to Gmail with. Now, this isn't always true. Some SMTP servers or some email servers actually give you a username that's different from the email you're actually sending from. So in my case, I'm going to be using hungrypie@gmail.com. It's a real email. I just don't actually use it. So it will send emails, but I never check them is the point. And I'll put it in my password here. Let's get it started. 2020. Okay, so these are my username and password, and what I need to do is log in to my SMTP server. So SMTP is the way you can actually send email. You might be familiar with this already. So we need to use Python's built-in features to do this. And luckily for us, there's a library called smtplib, and we can use this to create our SMTP server. Now there's two ways to write this. Like, you'll actually see this a couple ways. So first of all, let's declare a variable. In this case, I'm calling it server, and we're going to put it equal to smtplib.smtp, and then we're going to pass a few arguments in there. And then after that, we will just do server.quit. Okay, so what this does is this opens up the server and this quits out that process. Sometimes what you might see is with smtp.lib.smtp as server, and then some code in here, which is essentially doing what this is doing, right? So it's opening up this, so it says with this, treat it as server. So then in here, you could write all of the related server things like server login, right? So I just wanted to mention that because that is something that you'll see from time to time. Now in my case, I'm going to leave it in as this because I want to know exactly what's going on with all this. So I definitely want to make sure that I quit it though. I want to quit that session of that SMTP connection that we have. So let's go ahead and do server.ehlo. This is a configuration that we just want to run by default, as well as server.startTLS. We want to have a secure connection here. And then finally, we'll do server.login, and we'll log in the email that we want to use. So in our case, I'm going to go ahead and pass in one more argument down here, which is going to be the from email. Now, I'm also going to set a default of hungrypie@gmail.com. And now, again, the reason I'm changing from email and username is that those are mutually exclusive. So I'm going to go ahead and log in with username and password. And then we're going to go ahead and do server.sendMail. And we'll do from email. So from email being the argument that we're passing in that function. And then the to emails, as in the list of emails that we want to send. And then we need to send an actual MSG string, which I'll leave in as MSG_STR. So of course we haven't actually created the message string just yet. But what this is essentially doing is it's going to allow me to just call this function and it will send everything that I need to send. But all it does so far is actually log in and all that. So I want to test this out. Let's go ahead and jump into the terminal. I'm just going to jump into Python 3 and copy and paste a few things here just to make sure everything's working as intended. So we'll do the SMTP server. We'll start ehlo. In this case, I have to run to connect first. So I need to add a couple items in here, and that says host equals to smtp.gmail.com, and the port is going to be equal to 547. So these are standard ways of connecting to any SMTP server. So this is the host that's doing it. In this case, of course, it's Gmail. But if you were using something like SendGrid, I believe this is actually the host for it. It might be SendGrid.net. But if you use a different service, you just need to change what the host is and what port it is. Typically, when you want a secure email, which is what we're doing, you want to use 547. That's pretty, or rather 587. Sorry, not 547. That's pretty standard as far as actually connecting to it. Okay, so now that we've got that, let's reinitialize this server here, and we'll do the ehlo. Now it's saying that SMTP is at our service, so we can actually use it. All we need to do is start TLS, and it's ready to start TLS. Next, we need to log in with our username and password, and I get accepted. Now, of course, if you have the invalid password or you didn't allow less secure apps, then you will probably run into an error right here. That's why I'm going line by line testing all of these. Now, of course, send mail, this is not going to work because I don't have all of the features for it set up. I'm not even going to worry about that right now. The final thing I'll do is actually quit this out just like that. Okay, so now it's quit, and if I try to log in again, it's showing me that it's disconnected, right? So I have to reconnect it by reinitializing it like we did here. And again, if we did this with call here, it would do something very, very similar to what we just did, but it would automatically quit on its own after we exit this little block here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create the from email, to emails, and message string portion of this. Now the from email is actually just an email right here, but I can format this just a little bit more and call this like hungry pie and put brackets around it just like that. This gives you a name in there, if you will. So like if you're used to using Gmail and you see, let's go into all mail. When you see stuff like Google or an actual listed out name, right? That is where that comes from. Okay, that's where this portion comes from. Cool, so we can actually pass that in. The next is the to emails. Well, to emails is a list of emails. That should be fine. And then finally, the message string. So MSG, STR, equals to something. Now, if you notice, we didn't actually use subject. And the reason for this is because we didn't actually formulate an email message. We can use a string potentially, but more than likely you won't be able to use a string to actually send a valid email anywhere. You have to do a lot of default things that emails have. So to do this, we need to import a few items that are built into Python. So we'll go ahead and do from email.meme.text import meme text. Look at that, it completes it for me. So from email.meme.multipart import meme multipart. There we go. So the reason I'm using multipart is so I can attach both a plain text email and an HTML email, or I can also attach files, which is something we're not going to cover. It just gets a little bit too advanced there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to say MSG equals to this multipart, meme multipart. We're going to put parentheses at it. We're going to call it, initialize it. And I'm going to put a string in here called alternative. And in here, I'll go ahead and do MSG from, notice the capital there. We're going to use that from email again. And now I'm going to do MSG and to, again, capital. And this is going to be that list there. So two emails. But we don't want it to just be a list. We want it to be a comma separated list. Right? So what does a comma separated values string look like? Well, let's go back into the terminal. I'm going to exit out of this recent session and go into Python 3 again. And now I'll go ahead and say my list equals to ABC 1, 2, 3. Notice these are all strings here. And then I can use this empty string dot join my list and hit enter. What it does is it takes every item in here and turns it into one long string, or whatever it is that I'm putting in this join. So if I press up here and put a comma there, this is now comma separated values of a list. Now, a cool thing about that is I can do the opposite of that. So let's go ahead and say my items equals to this join call. Right, so I can print out my items and it gives me that. I can do the opposite of that by doing my items dot split, and we split on a comma, right? So there is commas in there, so it's going to split on the comma, and that's going to bring us back to that list, which is pretty cool. So what we need to do on our emails is actually join it in a similar fashion. But of course, you can also add additional things into this string. So if you wanted to, do something like that, it will join each one like that. So just keep that in mind when it comes to actually using this, or if you needed to do a dash, that's how you do that, right? So whatever string you put in there is going to go basically in place of what the comma is. And if we do a comma and a space, it just turns it into one nice long string, which is how we actually want to do this. Okay, cool. So now we do that comma and string, and then we'll join those two emails. So now we have the to portion of this message. Next, we need to do MSG and subject. And we're going to set that equal to our argument of subject from up here. Okay. Now what I need to do is actually attach the text or the body text that I'm passing through in here. So the first thing about the part about this is we'll just go ahead and say txt part equals to meme text, like we did when we imported here. And then we want to pass in our text right here. And you might need to change the encoding here, depending on your language. Let me know in the comments if you want to know how to do that. But the idea is that we use plain text here. And then this we will go ahead and attach. So msg.attach to the multi-part item. And then with that, I'll copy this and paste right underneath. And we'll call this HTML part. And this time, instead of plain, we would use HTML. And I'll go ahead and do H1. This is working. Okay, so initially I'm not actually going to use the HTML part. I'll leave that out for just a moment while we test this. Finally, the MSG underscore string is really just this original message and then dot as string, just like that. Okay, so we're now ready to actually send this message. We're ready to run send email. So let's go ahead and try this out. I'm going to jump into my terminal. I'm going to exit out of that Python shell that we had, and I'm going to cd into day 9. And we're going to go ahead and run the interactive shell of Python 3 of send underscore mail.py. Okay, so now I should be able to send mail, and I want to add a to, let's see, we called it 2 emails. I need to actually have 2 emails. And in this case, I'll just say hungrypie at gmail.com, just like that. I left everything else the default. The text will just say email body, the subject, hello world, and so on. And I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And it loaded. Seems like it worked. I'm going to jump into Gmail and just take a look. And sure enough, there it is. Of course, I'm sending it from myself, but notice that the from email message is correct. The email body is coming through, so that's good. All right, so let's try that again. This time, I'm going to go ahead and attach the HTML message, which we had right here. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this, go back in, press up a couple times, send it again, and back into my emails. And now I've got some HTML message coming through in there as well. Pretty cool. So this means then I should have one more argument in here, and we'll call it HTML equals to none. And then I'll just basically say if HTML is not equal to none, then I'll go ahead and pass it in and add it like that. So the passed HTML argument, if it's not equal to none, we're going to go ahead and attach that as our string. And Gmail and many other mail services will actually use the HTML version and not the plain text version, even if it actually has the plain text version. Cool. And of course, I can change my text and my subject and my from email, and finally, of course, my to email. All right. So a word to note is the username and password. This is not a secure way to do this. There are other ways called environment variables, which is not something we're going to cover right now, but you should be aware of it, that you might want to actually store these things in. And going further, using something like SendGrid will give you different kinds of ways of authenticating to send email. But now that we have this send mail function, let's go back into our send.py. And in this case, I actually want to use send mail in the send, right? Like we actually did have something like that. So I'm going to go again and say from send underscore mail, import send mail, right? So our send mail module, that's the name there. And then our function was called also send mail. Okay, so we have our formatted message with somebody's name, right? So send mail, we're gonna replace a lot of these things down here. And I'm gonna go ahead and say send mail. The TXT is going to be the MSG that we formatted up here, right? And I don't have HTML for this, so I don't need to worry about that. The to email, well, we should probably have a to email. And I'm going to set this equal to none. Notice that I'm not putting a big list here, but rather just one single email. And to emails is going to be a list with only to email in there. So I need to, of course, assert that to email is not equal to none. Like, we don't want it to be none, right? We want it to be some value in there. Of course, I could do other checks in there, like if it's a valid email address and all that. I'm not going to worry about that at this point, but I will try and actually send this message, and we'll do it using all of this. Now, of course, the to email needs to be in there as well. So we put name in the first position. Let's go ahead and put email in the second position. So if the length of sys.argv is greater than 2, then email equals to sys.argv 2. And then to email equals to that email. Put a comma there. Okay. And with that verbose print statement, I'll go ahead and add in the to email here. All right. So now I should have a better formatted message to what's coming through. And send mail does not have HTML coming through in here, so I can declare it just to make sure that I have HTML equal to none, because I'm not passing any HTML. Now we can save that. And I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this shell here. Now it's important that we're in the correct directory, so make sure you do cat, and you can see that sendmail's in there. So I'll go ahead and do Python 3, and it's going to be send.py, Justin, and then finally hungrypie@gmail.com. I hit enter, and I get none back. That's okay. We'll see why in a second. Let's go back into our email here. And what do you know? There it is. We actually are able to send a message. And of course, I can do it again and again and again as many times as I need. Now, the reason I'm getting this none back has to do with send mail. Like, it's not actually returning any sort of response, as we see here, right? And we also might run into an issue with the actual email. Let's say, for instance, I put the wrong password in and I try to run it. I'm going to get this SMTP authentication error. So this is where we want to use something called a try block. We're going to use try in here. And then we'll go ahead and say accept pass. And I'll say sent equals to true. And sent equals to false. Okay. And then down here, we'll go ahead and return sent, whether or not it was sent. So it'll say true or false value of what this response is. So I save that. And remember, outside of that try block, if I didn't have that try block in here, this is what we saw. Now with that try block in here, we see false, right? So it's basically just ignoring the fact that it was not sent. And if I put 2020 in here, going back and run it again, now it says true, so it's actually sent. Pretty cool. So that's actually sending emails. It's very useful, and I do not expect you to remember how to do all of these things. All you need to remember really is messages are unique. Email messages are unique. They're not just a plain text of string, right? Or plain string text. You have to add additional things to it, such as to, from, and subject. And then we can attach an email, and then we just need to connect into the server and send the message there, and then finally quit that email server. So that's sending messages. Now what we need to do is actually open up our inbox and take a look at some of those messages. It's going to be similar. We're going to be using our authentication. We're going to be importing some things, and it's meant to be more of a long-term reference than it is to be something that you need to memorize. Hey there, this section is a little challenging. I do encourage all of you to go through it because what we've done up until this point has prepared you to make this feel a little bit easier. It's still going to be challenging and it's still a little bit of a stretch, but I do hope that you go through it and use the reference code when you get stuck. So you don't have to type and copy and keep up with everything that I'm doing. You can literally copy all of the reference code just to make it happen if you need to. But the idea here is that we do something brand new that we've never done before that might be a little bit harder. So let's go ahead and do it. Now that we have a way to send email, I'm going to show you a way to check your inbox. Now, I don't expect you to remember how to do all of these things, and I'm not going to go into that much detail because we start to lose the purpose of just checking this inbox anyway. The main reason for this is just to understand that we can do it and we have reference to do it. The purpose of day 9 was really to get that send email function out there. But as a bonus, I wanted to show you also how to open up your inbox. So let's go ahead and jump into day 9, and I'm going to make a new file in here called inbox.py. And in here, we want to import something called IMAP lib. Now you might be familiar that IMAP is a way to actually open up your inbox, where SMTP is a way to send a message from your mail server. So IMAP is not able to send messages like SMTP, and SMTP is not able to open messages like IMAP. So we're going to import IMAP, and we're going to also import email. And then I want to grab my host, and that's going to be imap.gmail.com, of course, or whatever your IMAP host is. And then I want to grab my username and password. Again, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste from SendMail here. Okay. And now I just need to log in to this mail server. I'm just going to call it mail and imap4_SSL. We're going to initialize that with the host that we had here. And then we'll go ahead and do mail.login with the username and password that we had. And then we're going to go ahead and say mail.select to the inbox. This is our default inbox that we're going to be grabbing here. There are other ways to select different kinds of inboxes, but for the vast majority of you, this is going to be the easiest way to do it. So what we want to do is actually search in here for unseen messages. You can get all of the messages, or you can just grab the unseen ones. So I'm going to use an underscore here as a placeholder for a variable, which I'll show you in just a second. So we do search data equals to mail.search, and we're going to say none and quote unseen, all capital. Okay, so what the heck is going on here? Well, if we look into the Python shell, this is a good thing to check out. We can say something like ABC and another is equal to 1, 2, 3, comma, something like that, right? So this is called unpacking into different variables. You can also say another equals to 1, 2, 3, and like that. But now if we look into another, it's a different data type that we haven't talked about, but it's very similar to a list, except you can't really change it. It's called a tuple or tuple, spelled like that. And if you want to unpack it, you can just say ABCX equals to another, and that's a easy way to unpack it. Now, oftentimes you'll see if you only want one piece of that, you can use an underscore with a comma just as a placeholder for that value. Like you're not actually going to end up using that value. So you'll see underscores like this all the time. So again, I'm not actually using that value, but I wanted to unpack the results from this itself. And like most programs that we end up writing, you can feel free to copy and paste this into the shell or use the interactive shell and actually go through each one to see what exactly is going on. But again, this is meant to be a reference just to really quickly see what are our recent inbox items if we are so interested. So now what I want to do is I want to actually look for what's inside of this search data. Like there's actually results with this search, or there's potentially results. So I want to actually grab what those results are. Let's actually see what that looks like. So print out the search data. So I did mention that you could do this on your own, but we're going to just try this one out as an example. Okay, so when I print out search data, this is what I get back. Okay, So this might start to get a little complicated because if I print out search data 0, it says B and 4, 5, 6. What does that do for me? Well, if I actually do split, what that does then is it turns each one of those items into a list item. If you remember a little bit ago, we talked about split, but we did it with comma. In this case, if you don't actually put anything in there, it will just split that data based off of spaces by default. So now it's split data, so I can actually iterate through this and find the message that's related to that. So in other words, I can say for num in the search data dot, or rather search data 0, because remember it came back as a list, kind of a weird list, but a list nonetheless. So we get the first item in that list, and then we split it. Okay, again, here's the list that comes back. Then when we get that first item, that's what it looks like. Then we split it, it turns into its own list, and then we can actually use these for something. So each one of these things actually references the email message that we're looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and say that, again, an underscore and data equals to mail.fetch, and then the number that we are iterating through. And then we also need to pass in this argument here of a string with parentheses and RFC822. So this will allow us to actually grab the correct message or the message that's in there. And again, we can print out what that data is. So let's go ahead and print that out. I should have that search data still in there. It looks like I do. So I come in here, and this is actually printing out a jumbled version of the actual item that we're looking for. This is the actual messages that are in here. As you see, you can kind of tell what's going on. You can kind of not. So that, of course, means we need to parse this data a little bit more. But if we search through that again, what we see is some interesting things about it. So this last one right here, notice that it's a list, right? So there's actually a list item in here. So I can go ahead and say 0, and we can print what that out. That is now. And now it's showing me yet another item in here. So it's showing me a tuple this time, and we can expand that tuple. So I could just go ahead and say A and B equals to, again, the data itself. And this time I'm going to go ahead and print out A and B just to separate them a little bit and get rid of these print statements here and run it through. And we've got this separated thing out. It's a little bit harder to tell, so let's just go ahead and print out B because I know that's the one that I want. So again, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this in here. And B is now the string that I'll end up using. But notice that there's a B in front of it, like as in bytes. So I want to turn that into a string itself. So I use an underscore, and then I'll go ahead and say MSG string equals to the string of B. So this is turning that original bytes into a string here. And now what we want to do is just parse this out. So again, I can print out what that is. So message string and message string. Let's go ahead and copy this and paste it in here. And there we go. We've got our message string here. And now I don't, it looks like it's still actually treating these as bytes. So it's not actually changing that because doing a string like this doesn't necessarily change it. So I'm gonna leave it in just as B. And so we want to break this down into saying email message equals to email.message from bytes. And we'll go ahead and pass in the bytes there, the B. And I'll go ahead and print out email message. And let's see if that gives us the correct value here. It looks like it does. Notice that this is now starting to look a lot more like an email as you may expect. Okay, so that's pretty cool, and that's actually coming from the inbox. But we can go a little bit further with parsing this data. And so I can do something called for part in email message dot walk with the parentheses. And then if part dot get content type equals to text plain. No worries if you don't know how to do this yet. We'll talk about it. I'm going to go ahead and just say body equals to part.get payload and decode equaling to true, and we'll go ahead and print out that body. Okay. We can also say or part.get content type equaling to the text/HTML. Remember how we did plain or HTML. This will print out both of them, or at least it should. So let's go ahead and comment out that print again. We'll run through this data again. And oops, we said path. This is a typo. That should say part. And one more time, let's run it. And there we go. So this is actually giving me the actual data that's in that content. As you notice, it's the ones that we sent just a little bit ago. So that's pretty cool. I mean, I now have a way to see what this body data is, and it's actually coming through in a way that's somewhat useful. Now, it's still coming through with the bytes, so without decoding anything, let's try message from string in here without changing anything else, and let's see if this actually works for us. So I'll run that through, and no, I'm getting an error saying that it can't be bytes, it has to be a string. So we have to use bytes, or we can decode those things right there. But I'm not going to go that far in this. What the only next part I'm going to do is actually go ahead and say for header in subject to from and date. I'll go ahead and print out using some formatting here. And then dot format, some string substitution format that is, of course, header, and then email message header, so getting the actual value of whatever that header is. So again, we save that. We go ahead and copy this whole thing and refresh that. And now I've got my subject to, from, and then the actual text that came back from it as bytes. And that's actually not that hard to change. We would just do body.decode because it is bytes. And we can run this yet again. Come back in here. And there we go. We now have our subject to and so on. So I'm going to do one more thing, and that is getting the content type. I'm going to go ahead and copy this for the HTML portion. And I'll say if content type is that. Then I'll go ahead and say HTML body is equal to that value. And then I'll get rid of that or statement there. And we can actually use this in as elif. And now what I'm going to do is just create a dictionary for this message. So I'll go ahead and say the message or the data, or let's say email data equals to an empty dictionary here. And we're going to set this empty dictionary inside of all this data. So I'll go ahead and say email data header equals to the actual value from the email message, and then email data body equals to that body.decode. And then same thing with the HTML body. And HTML body.decode. Okay, and I'm gonna get rid of these print statements. And then I'll go ahead and make a list up here. I'll go ahead and call this my messages equals to this list here. And then at the end of that loop statement, like after these two for loops come through, I'm going to just do my message.append email data. And then finally, I'll wrap this whole thing into a function called get inbox. And it's going to be all of this stuff right here. And all it's going to do is return my message, or rather my messages. But it's going to return that list of my message, which would be really my inbox. And again, we'll do that main call. If name underscore underscore equals to main, we'll go ahead and say my inbox equals to get inbox. and then we'll just print out my inbox. We'll save that. I'm going to exit out of the terminal here, clear it out, and we'll run python-i inbox.py, and it should actually do that lookup for me. It's giving me nothing, so it looks like it didn't actually find any messages that were unread. So let's go ahead and hit exit. I'm going to go ahead and send a few messages to myself, and there we go. And let's run that inbox call again. And I used Python when I should have used Python 3. Python 3-i inbox.py. Oops, I'm inside of Python. My mistake. So Python 3 inbox.py. And there we go. So we actually have some or a single message coming through in here. And naturally, if I look in my inbox, is one single unread message, right? So IMAP is doing that for me. So if I try to get the inbox now, I'll probably get none, right? Because they all have been seen. Now, if I let's go ahead and exit out of Python and clear this out. Press up a few times. Let's send a few more messages. And then finally, Python inbox.py. And again, I messed up. It should be Python 3 inbox.py. And there we go. So this is giving me one of those messages back. It's not necessarily giving me all of them. Or perhaps it is. Let's see. Oh yeah, it does look like it actually is giving me all of them. Here's one of them. Here's the other one. And as we see here too, subject and subject. Okay, so that is how we do it. And notice that it actually is saying that those are seen now. So every time I send myself a message, let's just try this one more time by going up. So I send a message to myself, right? So we refresh in here inside of Gmail. I have that message. And now if I press up a couple more times again and look at the inbox, it's grabbing that message. I refresh in here. And it is marking it as read. So it's like as if we did see it, which is pretty cool. So that's how IMAP works. So you're actually able to grab that message, take a look at it, read it if you need to. And then now when I go in here, I have no unread messages, right? So there's obviously a disadvantage of this is like, hey, well, if I'm looking at these messages and I don't want them to be looked at or treated as read, then of course I need to use a different method. So there's no doubt in my mind that this was a little bit of a stretch for you. Sending email also might have been a little bit of a stretch, but certainly the inbox itself is a little bit uncomfortable because of all of these kind of breaking things apart, looking for certain indexes, splitting things, and I did it like that. I totally realized that. But the point of this was to give you a reference on how to open up an inbox, something that you could use right now, but also to show you that the more advanced stuff that you'll be learning is not that far away from what you know already. And in the example of this first 3 lines here, now this is something you haven't seen yet. You haven't seen a class and running functions from a class, which is what we did right here. But they're still functions and they still work in a similar fashion than what we've seen with either an empty function or one like formatting.py. And then, of course, we looped through some data here. We split up some data. We got some stuff from the index. And then we did some other methods that, really you'd have to look up in the documentation to really understand how to do this. That's what I did. Before I actually started recording this, I went and made sure that all of these pieces actually worked. And then I used that reference itself, right? So here it is. Here's the reference that I was going off of to make sure that I could go through all this with you and explain as much of it as possible. But I certainly am not going to remember this off the top of my head. Why would I? It doesn't make sense to. But the point is that now we have a reference to use something real, and we got a little taste of what a little bit more of a challenging problem would look like with the skills that we already have. And my hope for you is actually that you got more questions and felt a little bit more confused than you ever have in this series, because once you have those questions and that confusion, that's when you feel really, really good once you start to really understand those various things. So thanks so much for watching day 9. I realize this one was a lot longer, but we packed in a lot for you that is very practical, something that you can do right now. So by all means, feel free to send email to hungrypie@gmail.com. You can blow that thing up as much as you want. Naturally, this password is going to change by the time you see this video, so don't try it. But definitely check out your own email and consider using your send mail fairly often in your various projects. What's cool about this too is that you can absolutely loop through a number of items. We don't have to just do one-offs. You could send 100 emails this way as response to messages of any kind. So thanks again for watching. See you next time.